Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Sydney, and I'm from the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce. We're so excited to have you join us today for our webinar, HR Hour, discussing 2024 pay trends. In discussions with our members and local chambers across the state, we've learned that the field of HR is evolving very quickly. First, it was challenged largely by unprecedented pandemic working conditions, and now the field is under pressure to recruit and retain talent in an increasingly tight labor market. So we've assembled a top-notch team of professionals to help us answer your questions. Our goal is to supply you with information sessions on a quarterly basis, featuring different experts from the Nebraska Chamber membership in order to provide you with insight into the HR world. Today, we're going to walk through the evolving landscape of employee compensation, shed light on emerging trends and best practices, and provide strategies that may help your organization stay competitive and attract top talent in the year ahead. Before we begin, I'd like to especially thank our lineup of co-hosts and sponsors, including the Nebraska Chamber, HR Simple, and Salary.com. For those of you that are participating for professional credits, be sure to hang on at the end of the session for the reference codes for the program. And also for those of you located in Nebraska, be sure to watch the chat for a coupon code if you'd like to order the 2023 HR manual that is created by Nebraska Chamber members, Newts and Law, and HR Simple. Now I'm pleased to present and introduce you to our presenter today, Katie Stukowski, Vice President of Solutions Consulting at Salary.com. Katie leverages her HR technology and compensation expertise to help companies meet the many challenges of today's unemployment landscape, from achieving pay equity to adopting skills-based pay and more. As Vice President of Solution Consulting, Katie takes great satisfaction in translating the feedback and insights she receives from clients into the development and enhancement of Salary.com's data and product portfolio, including the award-winning Comp Analyst Pay Equity Suite. She also earned her Bachelor of Arts in Communications from Purdue University and has earned a World at Work Certified Compensation Professional designation. Throughout the session today, we will be answering questions that you all have submitted either before the program or through the Q&A. If additional questions come up, be sure to just submit those in writing in the Q&A box. And Katie, I will pass it over to you now.
Perfect. Thank you, Sydney. So hi, everyone. I am Katie Stukowski. I am with Salary.com, as Sydney mentioned, and I'm very excited to be here to present compensation and HR trends that we all should be interested in and also understanding are happening in today's landscape. So that's what we're going to cover in today's webinar. As Sydney mentioned, I spend most of my time with organizations and clients like yourself talking about challenges, trends, the needs that they have around compensation and HR data or products, or even just consulting or decisions to ensure that they are meeting the demands that we're faced with in today's hiring and work landscape. So today's overview and presentation on the webinar is going to really highlight, I guess, pay trends that will dominate 2024, but honestly, a lot of these are pay trends that you're probably already working to address. You're probably already feeling some of the impetus or strain or importance of within your organization, and some thoughts or some insights into how to maybe approach what you do to tackle some of those trends or changes or challenges within the hiring and recruiting and HR landscape. So let's get started. We're going to cover a quick agenda today. So I'm going to do a quick highlight on kind of overarching business and HR trends that we have seen really spin up here at the end of 2023, and certainly will be big areas of interest for 2024. But then we'll quickly go right into what are some of the compensation trends? What are some of the challenges that you might be facing when it comes to attracting and retaining your talent, especially when it comes to pay? What are some of the shifts that you might be incorporating into your pay policies? And what are some of the ways that organizations are maybe becoming a bit more creative to addressing those driving challenges and insights within compensation as well? So that will help us really talk about developing strategies to compete. We're going to touch on things like job architecture. Do you understand the jobs within your organization and how to get a better understanding of what roles you have, what roles you need, who are the right people for those right positions? We'll talk about market pricing effectively. Do you have a competitive but equitable pay strategy? And how do you start to implement within your organization? We'll talk about pay transparency, probably one of the biggest buzzwords around today. Employees themselves are demanding more transparency around pay. They're demanding more transparency around career opportunities. Certainly that ties really closely into pay equity, which we'll talk about as well. And how, as an organization, do you think about your approach to transparency and equity? Where are you at today? Which strides are you looking to make in the future? Which legislation might be demanding you to focus on new things? And then we'll talk a bit about compensation in the age of artificial intelligence, AI. I'm not going to spend too much time there. My personal opinion, we haven't quite caught up in compensation in HR. We're still a bit far away from probably seeing a major impact of AI at this point, but we'll certainly touch on a couple bullet points there as well. And then we'll certainly leave time for questions and answers. Amy will be joining us at the end as well to make sure we cover any questions or any sort of just input that you're seeking from today's webinar, which you can certainly put in the chat, and we'll try to make sure we cover all of those at the end of today's session. So let's get started. Let's talk a bit about what are the business and human resources trends we've seen tick up here in 2023, and we know are going to continue into the 2024 landscape. One of the big ones that you still see on the top of this particular slide is the combination or the impetus on remote versus hybrid work. You know, the pandemic, as Sydney mentioned at the beginning, created a whole new landscape of work that organizations, professionals like yourself had to start to understand. How do we deal with maybe going to a remote culture? Or if you're in an industry where remote work isn't something that you can offer, how are you addressing the hiring pool of employees that are looking for more flexibility in more of a hybrid type work world? This is certainly a trend that I think has been ongoing for the past several years, something that many organizations even had to sit down and think about. Are we going to pay remote workers differently? Are we going to pay everybody on a potential scale? But it's still ongoing. There's still new trends and shifts in talent willing to leave companies if they don't provide some form of hybrid option without having backup plans. We'll talk about that on a couple slides moving forward. We're still seeing many organizations offering a more of a remote work type opportunity because that can also increase your talent pool. So certainly still a trend to be aware of. And as we think about compensation and your market pricing process, are you still thinking about how do we price differently if we're hiring talent in different locations? How are we recruiting talent? Do you have legislation that demands job postings in certain states versus others? And all of this ties into the trend and understanding of, as an organization, are we offering some of this remote hybrid type opportunity? And are we prepared to do so? Not just from an HR practice, but from a compensation practice as well. Labor actions, we've all seen in the news lately, there's been a ton of shift and change and good change as the labor actions have continued. We've seen milestones with unions making strides within the auto workers as far as their minimum wage thresholds and seeing increases year over year coming down the road. We've saw the strike in entertainment and the writing staff demanding that they were to receive higher compensation for the work that they're putting in to help make sure this industry continues to be the billion-dollar industry that it is. Those are actions that will continue to come down the pipe, and something that, depending on the industry you're in, might impact what you're thinking about paying or addressing within your organization as well. We all know there's been prolonged inflationary pressures. We're going to talk about merit increases, cost of living adjustments. What are organizations doing today to make sure they're keeping up with the shifting challenges of inflation, as well as a lot of different impact from political environments, as well as automation. We're not going to talk a ton about AI in today's presentation, but there are organizations like IBM who are going out there vocally and saying we're looking to replace 8,000 employees in the next year with artificial intelligence and automation. And what does that mean for the nature of work moving forward in our recruiting pool and how we think about work internally? And lastly, too, one of the big business and human resource trends that probably impacts most of you, at least in some way on the call, is the potential changes in the FLSA salary exemption cap. And what this means is the proposal would increase the amounts or the threshold for the exemptions that was exemptions to increase it to over $1,000 per week, which puts that up to over $55,000 a year. So if somebody is making that, or so if you have employees who've been making the $684 or $35,000 below that cap, or you've moved them into the exempt status at that $35,000 rate, you might need to understand, well, what do we need to do now when that increases to $55,000? How many employees do you have now that could be eligible for overtime? Do you go back and relook at your job architecture, your job descriptions, reclassify the jobs that you have internally? There's going to be a big amount of change and a big amount of impact that potential legislation is going to have across the board with organizations and how you look at your actual FLSA exemption status within your organization. So let's switch gears a little bit. Those are really big overarching trends that really impact organizations across the board, certainly from a human resource perspective overall. But let's talk a little bit about compensation trends. And these are the trends that organizations are looking to implement to make sure they're getting paid right. And in my opinion, all aspects of human resources and talent really trickle from pay, from compensation, or you could say all roads lead back to pay, because that is certainly the biggest proponent of attracting and retaining talent that you have in your company, and the biggest dollar amount or bottom line budget that your organization is going to spend. So all aspects of compensation trends also impact the broader human resource trends and help you think about strategies that you can implement to really approach those in a way that work for your organization, your company's philosophy around compensation and pay, and what you're able to also spend from a budgetary perspective as well. So we all know, as we saw from the HR trends, the pressure to get pay right has never been greater. Sydney mentioned it as well. We've come out of a pandemic that put unprecedented shifts within compensation and pay that we hadn't seen in over a decade. We have now the rigor of pay transparency. There's legislation trailing across states across the country that's driving more focus on pay equity and what that means and what you have to legally align with. We see wage inflation still. If you're in industries such as retail or even healthcare, hospitality, we're still seeing a huge tick in needing talent to come and work. We're seeing tons of positions still being open, but we're also seeing higher dollar amounts having to be offered to be able to get people in the door. So there are still a lot of challenges, but are also trends that we need to think about. How do we address these as an organization? And what are some of the steps we can take to really be in a good place to be able to approach these moving forward? We also can see some statistics on what are some of the trends that have come out as well. And these are from several different sources that you see up on the screen. One is internally here at salary.com. We run a number of different surveys. And from our Pay Equity Pulse survey, we know that 63% of companies say it's still more difficult to hire new employees, and 20% say they're still struggling. So even though there are jobs out there, there are opportunities for employees to go and work and be able to fill those positions, there are still struggles when it comes to bringing those people in the door. We also have seen from Harvard Business Review that 41% of employees in the workforce are actually considering resigning from their roles. And of that 41%, 36% don't even have a backup plan. They're saying they're willing to leave without having another job in place if that particular company or that job isn't meeting the needs that they believe they are seeking out of employment. That's a huge challenge. I know personally, when I entered the working world out of college, it was ingrained in me that if I was going to get a job, you don't leave a job without having another job. That was part of meeting your economic and your goals when it comes to career and being able to meet just objectives that you have in your everyday life. That's a shifting mindset. We're seeing more and more people willing to leave a job without having another job in place. And that could be for things like they want a hybrid opportunity. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's they're looking for just more work-life balance. There's a lot of things out there that are making it a bit more challenging to be able to recruit and retain talent. And that's still a huge trend that we're seeing is going to need some focus here in 2024 as well. We also see that 67% of employees are expecting their compensation to reflect their location. Going back to your process and philosophy around pay, especially if you're looking to hire remotely, are you going to be paying higher rates because they're in a premium location? Or are you going to be paying maybe at a national range of pay for everyone within the role because you're hiring them to do the work of the job and not necessarily going to pay them more just because where they're choosing to live or where they choose to relocate to within the past few years as well? And then, of course, we can see here from McKinsey that 40% of workers are still planning to leave their jobs within the next 3 months. So that's 2 out of every 5 employees. So the retention of employees is still a big trend. How do we retain people? But I would argue that you should be focused more on how do I retain the right people? I definitely am seeing a big shift out there that organizations aren't necessarily just going to pay what employees demand to come in the door. They're being more thoughtful about what their pay ranges are, what they're willing to pay for the right person with the right skills in the right role. And that should be the same as who you want to retain within your organization as well. So let's move forward a bit again to some of the other outcomes that we've seen from some of these trends, especially in compensation. And this to me is a really interesting slide. It's pretty data heavy. I'm not in love with data heavy slides, but what this is really showing is what are organizations looking and what have they done over the past few years. So if you look over here on the right hand side, we've gone from 2020 all the way into the plan 2024. What are organizations, what have they done for salary increases? What has been the norm? And what are they looking to do moving into 2024? And I know this might be a question that has come through from the audience. What are companies planning to do when it comes to salary or merit increases? Again, to help make sure we're not just retaining our talent, but we're equitably paying people within our organization. And although this isn't broken down by industry specifically, we can provide insights on that as well through our executive summary of this National Increase Budget Survey. What you can see, especially in the boxes with the 2023-2024, is the days of the 2.5-3% merit increase, kind of that peanut butter spread, everybody falls within those two buckets. It's basically gone. We have seen moving into 2022, the median was 3%, but when we jump into 2023, the median merit increase was 3.7%. That's closer to a 4% increase that organizations were giving to the majority of employees across the board. And then if you factor in potential additional market adjustments because of inflation or promotion or other increases, you can see down at the bottom the total increase percent in 2023 that companies were looking to provide to the majority of the jobs in their company is 4%. It's only a 1% difference, but that 1% is a really large jump from the budget, from the bottom line, and what has now become the norm, the status quo. And that's not going away. That's also what we can see is planned in 2024. And then if we were to break it down by industry, we'd probably see some even bigger deltas from there. And that means that the trends that we need to be investing more greatly in our employees, especially those that we perceive to be the skilled, talented people we want to make sure we're retaining in our company, is going to demand a higher percentage from a salary percent perspective. That doesn't mean everyone in your organization needs to receive that percentage, but we're definitely seeing a huge trend upwards when it comes to what companies are planning and what they have been providing from a merit increase point of view as well. So what are some other trends that we want to focus on as we think about the strategies next on how to compete in these areas? Regulations are evolving, as I mentioned. I know there's many on the line that are in various different states, and many different states have legislation driving how you need to think about pay equity in your organization, even the type of assessments or audits you need to conduct to ensure you're in line with those legislative demands. We know pay transparency is also getting linked to a lot of legislation drivers, or in a lot of cases, many organizations are starting to become very proactive in how they think about pay transparency because it's something that employees, honestly, they demand. Their expectations are much higher. There are a lot of states out there, Illinois soon to become one of them, Oregon, Colorado, California, and such that already have legislation that states you have to post a pay range on a job posting. It's something you have to provide legally. And in many states, when you provide an offer letter, it also has to be part of the offer letter that you're providing as well. That's all part of these pay transparency regulations that are evolving. And in many cases, I've worked with a lot of clients that even if that legislation isn't in their state yet, even if in Nebraska, that's not legislation because it's not, that's trickled down to date. If you're hiring in different places, it might be something that you consider incorporating into your process, because if employees live in states where that legislation is already in place, you have to adhere to that state level legislation as well. So in many cases, a lot of companies are just becoming more proactive. If they know they're going to have employees in remote work across the country, they're going to start posting a pay range no matter what. They're going to prepare pay ranges they can provide for offers because it's what we're seeing not only as a legality, but also just a demand, an expectation that employees want and are going to continually want from an organization as well. We did talk about FLSA already. There's shifts in potential changes and what that exempt threshold, that cap, is actually going to look like. And that's going to have a huge impact on a number of organizations and who they have to go back and review and either reclassify, or now may have employees that are going to be eligible for overtime and additional compensation they need to be prepared for. Jobs are changing. Another big trend that we're seeing, and many of you might already be thinking about this, skills. How do we focus more greatly on skills? How do we infuse that into our job descriptions? Are we using any form of skill to identify, ensuring we have the right people in the right roles? What talent might we be missing? How are we workforce planning to make sure that as a company we'll be performing as well as we possibly can? There's changes based on technology that are driving a shift in the skills that people might need to have to come into your organization. You may also be working with more hybrid jobs, people who are wearing multiple hats to take on new and diverse responsibilities to be able to meet the demands that your organization has in order to see the performance goals that you're striving for. Competitive markets are also more complex. We talked about entry-level pay is rising. There are many different states where the minimum wage is still continually increasing. What people are willing to offer for what were prior to what would be kind of lower paid entry level roles are also shifting. We're seeing regional pay differences changing. Inflation has caused, bigger percentages in geographic and cost of living differentials. We're seeing compression issues. Over the past few years, you may have paid top dollar to bring talent in your door, and now you need to go back and address, but how have we been paying those legacy employees who are in those same roles? How do we bring that gap down to have more pay parity, where we had to maybe provide that level of income to attract talent then, but now we need to address the compression issues that we have today. And pay is more complex across the board. We've talked about that through this whole thing. And there's many, trends that are driving that. And so basically our jobs are just more challenging, probably more rewarding, but certainly more challenging from there. So what are some of the strategies you can think about developing to help compete in this landscape? Because we can't tackle them all at once. There's not one silver bullet that's going to help make sure that we put everything in place that's going to make this an entirely perfect picture for any organization. It is a journey. It is a process that will take some baby steps to get there. And in a lot of cases, it could be a crawl, walk, run approach. But what are some things to start thinking about, and what are the most important for you and your organization to start to maybe implement to compete in this landscape that we're seeing and with these trends that are coming about? There are certain key components to making sure that you do have an effective strategy in place. Job architecture, understanding your jobs. Do you have documentation? Do you have descriptions? Are you understanding what jobs you have? How many families? How many levels? Are you looking at including skills so you can have a better way to assess? Do we have the right people in the right roles? And are we also looking to provide more career progression from a transparency perspective to our employees as a way to continually maintain them within our company? We're going to talk about some strategies around market pricing. Are you paying correctly? How are you ensuring that you're being competitive from a pay practice? Are you thinking about strides around pay transparency? How transparent do you want to be? How transparent don't you want to be? You as the HR or comp professional might have a very different view than your leadership does. And how do we come to some common ground? And that trickles into pay equity as well. So let's start with some of the job architecture, importance of job architecture as well. I think everyone on the line probably understands that job descriptions matter. They are extremely important to every organization to have job descriptions, and they matter for a number of different reasons. There are dollar amounts attached to it. It could cost you up to $15,000 per bad hire if you are putting the wrong job description out there for a posting and you're attracting the wrong people and bringing them into your organization. But more importantly, job descriptions are truly the backbone for developing the catalog of roles, the architecture of positions you have in your company, but also being able to price jobs correctly and provide transparency to employees on what are they required to do in your organization? Why are they paid the way that they're paid? What is their opportunity for growth? And what is their capability to move forward? And career progression is slowly becoming the number one reason an employee will take or leave a job which has always been salary. So the progression, the opportunity for growth is becoming just as essential to employees in today's working landscape as how am I getting paid? But they also want to understand what are they going to be paid and why are they being paid that way, whether it's to come into your company or as they grow within your company as well. And in order to make sure you can accurately communicate that, job descriptions are essential so you know what the work of the job is and what people will be responsible to do within your organization. And job descriptions aren't fun. They never end. Job descriptions never end. So we more often than not see a lot of companies not having that one person who wants to own job descriptions. So what does that mean? HR and comp owns job descriptions. So it makes the level of work that we have greater, but it's also so essential to everything else that we'll talk about as far as strategies are concerned. A few bullets here too. Again, job descriptions, they don't need to be 6 pages long. They also shouldn't just be one line. So there's a middle ground when it comes to documenting the essential content in those descriptions. They should be consistent. So I know a big struggle for many organizations is having that consistency. You may be writing jobs for employees versus the job. The job description should really document the job, not the person. There are strategies to think about when it comes to how you implement these descriptions. But at the end of the day, making sure that you are writing them. If you haven't reviewed them in the past few years, please do. I would argue you could just throw them out at that point if it's 5 years old, if not. But it's essential to have job descriptions to really make sure you're implementing the right strategies to get pay right and be able to provide all of the different pieces to really meet these challenges or these trends that we're seeing, not just today, but will continue to come in the year to follow. Another big piece that we're seeing as well that organizations are starting to adopt as they think about their job architecture is the idea of skills and competencies. Having those essential competency frameworks to understand what are the actual components of this job that employees should be able to meet, and what are those individualized skills that employees should be showcasing so we can assess that we are putting the right person in the right job at the right level. And that also helps provide transparency to employees on what they would need to achieve, what they would need to gain from a skill set to move into potential positions, maybe in that same family or function, or have lateral movement to be able to move into other roles within the company where those skills could potentially be transferable. This is something that we're continually seeing as a big focus for organizations as they think about their job descriptions and their job architecture. How are we infusing the skills and the competencies that we should be aligning with our families and our roles to make sure that we can go beyond just the description at the job and have a better approach to assessing those individuals in those positions. And again, create a path to more transparency, better communication on how we can develop those individuals within our company. What you're seeing here on the screen is a sample of what that could look like. So if we think about what a sample set of competencies and skills would be, we can see here in an HR generalist type of focus, we might have these basic functional skill sets of benefits programs, employee engagement, HR operations, coaching others. But you can also see at what level. The 3 is a proficiency level. At what level, at what proficiency should somebody within each one of these roles, starting with the generalist, moving through the director, be able to showcase and accomplish those skills they're required to do? And if you have employees looking for transparency on how do I go from generalist to manager, this can provide them a clear path of not only what skills they need, but at what level they need to be showcasing those skills as well. And this is something that can really help flush out that architecture in a broader approach. To really kind of emphasize that as well, as you can see here from Gartner, 58% of the workforce will need new skill sets to do their job successfully. So again, having a sense of what are our jobs, what are the descriptions, what is the work that we have in our organization is also essential to then identifying gaps or what new skills are coming about that we also need to be aware of. So this is definitely something that's changing the landscape of work. It's definitely something to consider as you look at your jobs. What are some of those essential skill sets that those jobs now require, and help you then assess, do we have the right people today? Do now we have gaps that we need to fill? And how do we go find the talent to be able to bring those individuals in to fill those gaps moving forward? Because the work again, as a trend, it's shifting, it's changing. And in certain industries, as you can see, the total number of skills required could go up. It's gone up 10% since 2017, but 47% of companies, if they aren't looking at that, may not know what skills gaps that they actually have. So another great kind of tip as you think about job architecture, as you think about your job descriptions, are you also looking at the skills and the requirements that you have today and what might you need? And are you already having people in place that you can move into those roles, or is that really a workforce planning activity that you have to take on as well? And that will really round out here, as we can see before we move into market pricing, why organizations need skills. And again, a lot of companies start at a corporate level. This is not an easy task. Creating a skills framework for an organization usually has a lot of different hands, from talent acquisition, HR, maybe organizational development. It takes some thought and some work to really implement this effectively. But there are a lot of different pieces of the organization and different processes that this can really impact and help you be in a position to really be prepared for the trends, as we talked about, that we're seeing as well. Skills help with workforce planning. Again, identifying those gaps. What skills do you have within your talent pool? What skills do you not? What are the new jobs that you have or new skills that those jobs require? And do you have people who can move into those roles or gain those skills, or do you not? Training and development. It's really much easier to train and develop people when you have identified what are the skills and the proficiencies they need to be able to take on, to be able to move into other roles. And how do you then create training and development for them to earn those skills or gain those skills within your organization? There's also a lot of roles now that might have some shifts into skills-based pay, where you might be paying a little bit more for people who have the correct skill sets that you need to really do the work of those jobs, and maybe even pay more for the skills than maybe the years of experience. That is something that we'll see, again, as a big shift in the years to come, or even in the industries that maybe have traditionally always just continued to give those increases because someone's been there for a longer amount of time. But is it now more effective to think about those jobs have new skills that are required? And should we maybe pay more for somebody who already has those skills, or pay more as they gain those skills versus just longevity or even just performance, for example, as well? Skills are really critical to recruiting, making sure that you are hiring the right talent and putting the right talent in your jobs, even just getting the right people to apply to the jobs that they're qualified for. Having identified skills can really help bring your recruiting to the next level, and can also help provide interview questions that help managers make sure that they're aligning the right candidates with the right roles as well. And all of that goes right into your overarching performance of your company, performance management as well. Skills also help you assess and help explain better to employees how you're assessing them within their role, how you're assessing them against their performance, and provide potentially a less biased approach to a performance type process within your organization, leading into how they could correctly gain more money as well from an increased perspective too. So let's talk about market pricing effectively as well. So one of the big pieces is getting paid right. Again, although we're seeing a big uptick in career progression, that pay transparency being a big reason employees will come or leave your organization, number one reason is still pay. And it's still so essential to think about what is our philosophy? How do we want to pay the people that we have? What is our approach to pay? Have we had to shift that in the past few years, and we're now trying to come back to a more consistent process so we can start to address the gaps that we may have created and get to a closer approach to pay parity within our organization? So some of the best practices when it comes to market pricing: price the job, not the person. I know there's always going to be unicorns and critical people who are top performers within your company. But when you are market pricing, you should really be looking at that job description, that job, and you price the job and not the person. You also want that job description to map to some form of salary data that you're using. And that could be data from a free website if you don't have a data budget. That could be salary you're getting from a participant-based salary survey from a Mercer or a Willis Towers Watson. That could be aggregate data, job posting data. There's a lot of data sources out there. My personal opinion is use more than one if you can. But when you are looking to actually create a market pricing for a role, make sure that when you look at the overall responsibilities of the job and you're matching it to whatever data source you're using to make sure your pay range is competitive, you have a pretty strong match when it comes to that. And you should never price off title. Titles will vary. My title would be something drastically different in another organization. So you want to make sure you're looking at the role of the work, which clearly ties back to job descriptions, and making sure you have those accurately within your organization as well. Maybe for some roles, you're going to target higher market percentiles. You might have jobs, or you may need to be a bit more competitive, and where you maybe have just paid at the median of the market before, maybe you identify certain roles you're comfortable paying a little bit of a premium, and for others, maybe not. Or maybe your benefits package is super robust. So you're okay offering a little bit of a lower salary range because you're overcompensating in the total direct comp view with benefits and other types of perks that you offer. But then also make sure that you know how to communicate that effectively as well. And then also think about, how are we adjusting for industry, location, company size? We talked about remote work. Are you going to look at geographic specific data? Because if you're hiring in Chicago versus Lincoln, Nebraska, the pay difference might actually be significant. And are you looking to do a geographic type approach to the pay rates that you're offering or pay ranges that you're posting? And do you also ensure that you want to look at your industry? Certain jobs might be paid more or less based off of the industry that they're aligned with and the geography. So make sure that you are thinking about your philosophy and your approach. But these are some best practices to certainly start thinking of infusing in your market pricing practice as well. Know your labor market. Goes back to, how do you pay? Know how you compete for talent. What do you consider the labor market you are trying to attract people from or keep people within? That could be, again, location. It could be company size. It could be industry. It could be a combination of those as well. And as you think about what your labor market is, for some jobs, it might be everybody. For an accountant, it might be a more generalized view of, we can price nationally, not necessarily putting any focus on specific geographic or industry subsets, because we're kind of hiring from all organizations that surround us. But where are your new hires coming from? Where do your employees go and take jobs? Who are they taking jobs with? How does that change based on the job function? And that will help you identify how you should be pricing your jobs. And that labor market might differ based off of some of those questions and how you answer them as well. Promoting pay transparency. This is a big one. This is a trend that's not going away. It's been around for forever, but there's much more onus on it now than ever, especially with legislation, especially with all the HR business related shifts that we talked about. And a lot of pay transparency is linked with your pay strategy. If you don't have a benchmarking pay strategy or an idea of what your jobs are, it's really, really hard to be transparent when it comes to pay. Based off of our employer pay equity pulse survey, 36% of the companies that responded say they've established a pay philosophy that explicitly is committing to pay transparency moving into 2024. That's a decent number, but that also leaves a very large percentage that have not explicitly stated, we are looking to implement practices that help us create a broader, transparent pay process in our organization. So there's still work to be done. When it comes to pay transparency, though, think about what that means to you as an organization, because it's not one size fits all. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily post everybody's salary on your website or even all your pay ranges on your website. It also means that you shouldn't necessarily not talk about pay at all. So there are thresholds, but again, it's not one size fits all. So what is pay transparency? It's providing information to candidates and employees on their pay and the way it's determined. So it's basically being able to sit down, and when an employee asks you, why am I being paid the way that I'm paid? You have the ability to explain that to them. And it sounds simple, but it actually can be a very complicated conversation. Or if managers are having that conversation and don't understand why the pay was determined the way it was, what are they going to say? Oh, well, that's what HR told me. And so we need to do a little bit of work to make sure that we are training and coaching our managers and our leaders on being able to communicate pay as well. Practices that provide education and insight into, to your stakeholders on how rewards are granted and decided. Laws and regulations. These are all pieces that flow into what is pay transparency and why it's important. But it really all comes down to employees expect it, employees demand it. There are laws that state things like employees can talk about pay. So if you're not talking about it, they are. And how are you going to think about the level of transparency your company is comfortable with? And then how do you start providing the data and the information needed to be more transparent when you're communicating pay to a new hire, to a current employee, to people internally that have those questions? And it's definitely something that is imperative to making sure you're hiring and also retaining the people within your organization. What you can see here, though, is only 1/3 of HR professionals say managers in their company can explain why their employees are paid what they are. And again, that's a pretty large number. And I work with clients all the time that make strides in implementing these beautiful, grand pay processes. They have a philosophy. They're pricing jobs effectively. They're creating all of the job descriptions that they need. But at the end of the day, the first person employees go to when it comes to talk about pay is their manager. And if we aren't training and developing leaders within the organization to effectively communicate pay, all of that can break down. And then employees could have a perception of how you pay or how transparent you are. Are you a equitable company? That might very much differ from what you're actually doing internally. So it's also just as important when it comes to pay transparency is ensuring that you're starting to think about how do we educate the people in our company that need to be educated on how to talk about pay. How do you make those steps? And it's not easy. Pay is personal. Oftentimes I'd say a manager should ask, is this a conversation to their employee that you're ready to have today? Because it's also just as important to help them have the education they need to talk about pay correctly, but the employee also needs to be in the right mindset to have a conversation around pay as well. And one of the big things that can also be very helpful, going back to all these other pieces and strategies, is providing data, providing a job description, providing a pay range, providing the data, the total comp statement, the information that a manager can lean on to have that conversation and provide that transparency to that employee as well. And again, think about though, as a company, it's not one size fits all. How transparent as an organization do you want to get? And I do work with companies that some post every single person's salary on their interweb, and others, they still are kind of leaning towards, we don't talk about pay. But the reality is employees can talk about pay and employees are talking about pay. So finding some medium balance is probably a good approach to take when it comes to how transparent that you want to get. And at some level, every organization is going to have a demand to provide some detail of pay transparency within their organization. Again, it could be as simple as individual applicants for roles, you provide a pay range. You have general pay ranges that all employees have a sense that they can grow into. It could be everything. Everyone knows everything and you post everything out there. Or it could be that, again, pay is public in a lot of cases with the government, so it's out there anyways. So at what area are you looking to start this journey? And at what level is your company comfortable to get? But taking steps in some form is going to be essential to keep up with the transparency trends that will continue to come. There's also new pay transparency laws. And again, if they haven't impacted you today, they will at some point, or they might be impacting your talent pool, where you're recruiting, where they live. And in order to make sure that you're effectively meeting those demands, you should be addressing whichever legislation is whichever states you're actually recruiting from versus where you are headquartered as an organization. And new laws are happening all the time. So it's really important to keep track of where they are and where they might be impacting, again, the employees that you have today and the employees you're hoping to gain in the future. And especially if that's going to be sort of a remote workforce for you all as well. There are states, as I mentioned at the beginning, that require pay ranges to be disclosed upon hire. So not just on a job posting, but if you create an offer letter, you also have to provide that accurate range of pay that employee is going to expect to earn from taking that job within your organization. Some require it to be disclosed right there during the interview process. And we're no longer in the days of being able to say, what did you make at your last job? And then set a pay range off of that. That is in many states like Massachusetts, where I sit, you legally cannot ask an employee what they're currently making at their job. So as an organization, we need to be prepared with a pay range we can provide during that interview process that creates and promotes that transparency and that clarity to employees who are looking to take a job within your organization. And again, some might require it on a job posting. And what I'm seeing for many organizations is that's just becoming the norm. Putting a pay range out there, it also helps you become a little bit more creative and competitive. Because if you're in a state where that's not a requirement, and you're one of the organizations that's choosing to post pay ranges, employees are more apt to actually apply to a job where they understand what the pay range would be versus those that aren't supplying that level of transparency from day one. So just something to consider from there. So again, going back to kind of the drawing board, how do we prepare for more transparency? A lot of the strategies that we talked about for pay as well. Understand your jobs, understand what roles that you have, do an pay equity audit, meaning look at how are you paying individuals within your organization that are doing similar work. Understand where you have issues. By doing a pay equity audit, that helps you understand where you have issues. And it doesn't have to be full in-depth, statistical regression to do your pay equity audit. You could be starting to look at subsets of jobs within your organization. And do you have significant spreads in pay? And where do those spreads fall? And it doesn't even have to be based off of demographics like gender, ethnicity, or age. It could be based off of new hires and tenures. It could be just these employees all have substantially similar work in our company. And do we have any significant gaps within that population? And how do we want to start thinking of correcting those so we can feel confident that we can be more transparent around pay? Look at fairness for everyone. And that's what pay parity is. It isn't just we need to close pay gaps based off of demographics or tenure. It's if someone's doing a role that is substantially similar to someone else, the range of pay that everyone should be making should have equity. It should have fairness around that. And when it isn't, and you can't actually have a driver of why somebody might be making significantly more than someone else in that role, think about why that might be, and do you need to go to the drawing board and start to correct that? And of course, create a plan for communication. And that ties right with number 7. Communication, training managers, training your leaders who are the first line of defense when it comes to questions around pay is going to help you more effectively communicate your pay process within your organization. And providing them data like comp statements or market pricing data or a job description is only going to help equip them even further. The other piece that we talked about as a trend, and we're probably going to round this out here so we have a few minutes for questions, is supporting a culture of pay and equity, basically equal pay for equal work. And I know everyone on the line, I'm sure, is highly aware of this. But again, it's evolving. It's no longer just, are we paying men and women equally? Are we offering the same rates of pay? There's so much more detail that's going into legislation, so much more shifts that are going into what is truly equitable pay within your organization. As we think about it here at salary.com, and you can see on this slide, we really believe equal pay, pay equity is equal pay for comparable work that is not just internally equitable. It doesn't just look at internal drivers of how people are paid against one another, but it also should be externally competitive. It should also be in line with what the market demand is. And then you should also be able to transparently communicate it. Because as an organization, you might be making great strides, or you might have corrected any sort of gaps through your pay equity audits each year. But if that's not being communicated transparently, there could be a perception within your employee population that you're not an organization that's highly focused on pay equity within your company. So again, we really define it from sort of the full circle view. Keep in mind as well, as you saw on the last slide, pay equity doesn't mean equal. It doesn't mean everybody in a similar role should be paid exactly the same. It means that there are the opportunities for everyone to obtain the same level of compensation, the same range of compensation, if they are truly actually doing substantially similar work within the company. So it doesn't mean equal. It means equitable. It means having the opportunity to make the same range of pay if they truly are showing that they're doing this similarly situated or substantially similar work to their peers who are in those same roles as well. So pay equity is more than money. So also think about that. It's really about treating people fairly. Again, it all ties back to how are they being compensated based off of that. But employees want to really feel that they're part of an organization that has a focus on fair pay, and they're truly infusing that in their culture of HR, of their culture of compensation. What you pay people reflects what and who the organization values. And employees are seeking that more than ever out of organizations that they're looking to join or leave. Pay equity is about investing wisely in your people. Getting pay equity right is a great place to start to really ensure that you can communicate pay. You're confident in being transparent about pay. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's the right thing to do. So if you haven't taken any look at your company and where you may have pay gaps, it's definitely the right thing to start thinking about applying and implementing moving forward. And if you don't actually address pay equity, there are certainly impacts from that. Turnover, declining performance, damage to your brand as an organization, even, God forbid, legal claims, discrimination claims. It is certainly the right thing to do from a personal perspective, but it's also something that has significant impacts if you don't address it as well. So again, we're running up on time. This slide deck will be made available after today's webinar, but a few things just to think about when you are going to start your journey on assessing pay equity. Pay transparency is the core to addressing pay equity, so we spent quite a bit of time there. Really make sure that you're looking at who are the demographics in the roles that you have within your organization, who is doing equal work. That's where having an understanding of your job descriptions, your skills is so essential. Who is doing similar work? Who is doing the same skills, responsibilities, has the same working conditions? How are you defining that in your organization? Do you have pay differences? And having a pay gap is not illegal. It's okay to have a pay gap, but you need to be able to defend and actually explain why you have a pay gap. So if you find differences in pay, you need to understand what your drivers for paying people the way you do are and be able to explain why that gap might exist. And if you can't, close the gap. So those are things to think about as well when you're assessing your pay equity. And again, you need to make sure that people understand why they make what they're making, or they may inherently just believe that there is inequities when it comes to the pay practices within your organization as a whole. And it's easy to get out of balance. We all know that. We had to hire like crazy during the pandemic, meaning we weren't necessarily increasing our legacy employees' pay. It's a continually rotating door. It's like a revolving door going into a hotel. So it's not a set it and forget it type thing either. It's certainly something that you need to be reviewing more proactively to make sure that you don't end up going backwards every single time that you start to think about, do we have gaps and how do we address them as well? I did have one quick slide on AI, but as I mentioned, I don't feel like in our industry, we've certainly really caught up. You'll see some of these things infused with data. Some job descriptions now are maybe using AI to be written. I could do a whole webinar on what are some things to think about before going that direction and some legalities that could come out of that. But overall, the thing I will leave you with AI, it is something that's going to impact every company and every industry. But at the end of the day, essential skills and work are still human-based skills. So it's not necessarily going to replace the human element of, are we putting the right people in the right roles? And do we understand the new skills that we need to make sure we're keeping up with to make sure our company is performing as a whole as well? All right, so Amy, I see you've joined. So I know we just have a few minutes. So if there's any questions we want to address, would love to do so. I know they'll be providing an email address as well. So I'm always happy to answer questions offline. And certainly we'll provide the deck as a takeaway after today's presentation as well.
Yes, as Katie mentioned, we will make sure everybody gets a copy of the slide deck, and there's a lot of great stuff in here. And everybody will receive a copy of the recording as well. So that was a lot. And like, we did one of these webinars, I think just around this time last year, and I noticed that there are so many things that changed just in that amount of time, which is really a lot to keep up with.
It's a lot to keep up with. I guess the nice thing to think about, though, is some of the themes are consistently the same. So, and they all interconnect. So if you think about your pay strategy, that's going to impact pay transparency. That's going to impact job architecture. So it seems like so much, but so many of these things are intertwined that you're probably going to be addressing them all at the same time in some way, as you kind of start putting steps in place to kind of tackle these challenges and trends that are coming about as well.
Yeah, the job postings, the listing the salary information and the job postings, something that I didn't know. I'm located in Illinois, and that was interesting to hear that we actually got a question about that submitted before the webinar started. That says, do you recommend including salary information in job postings? And it seems like no matter, it depends on which state you're in. You should check your local laws and stuff.
You should definitely check your local laws, because in some states you are required. Illinois is going through that. They'll have to require that if you provide a job posting, you have to have a pay range. It's already in 16 states out there as an actual law. My personal opinion is be proactive. If you're going to be hiring outside of a state, anyways that maybe not have that law, it probably is going to impact states that you might be recruiting from anyhow. And if you're recruiting an employee that lives in a state where that is legislation, you have to adhere to that state's legislation. So a lot of organizations that I've worked with or just even talked with, they're being proactive. They're just doing it as a status quo. They're just starting to look back at what their pay ranges are. They're going to automatically provide a range when they're providing a job posting. So that way, no matter where they're at, or even in a state that might not demand it, it can actually give you an edge. Employees are more prone to apply for a job that has a range of pay than a job that doesn't. So it's also a great creative way to be competitive when it comes to compensation as well.
Yeah, I saw that. Okay. Is there a good website that tells you what each state's compensation regulations are? Do you guys have something at salary.com? If not, I can provide something, but
so there's a number of sites that can provide it for you. The OFCCP site has one where it will state all the state legislation guidelines on there. They also provide all of the regulations around pay equity. So if you're doing pay equity auditing, they have all the different requirements that you have to align to on there as well. Honestly, you could just even Google which states have legislation. It will take you to a whole different host of sites. But there are some good ones that you could also follow as well. I can provide you some, Amy, to send as a takeaway that you can also set alerts against. So you constantly have updates on what's coming through from a federally mandated perspective as well.
yeah, that would be really helpful. I will include all of this stuff in the follow-up email that goes out tomorrow to you guys.
Perfect.
You covered most of these. I think maybe one that could use a little bit more discussion is if we can't afford to give salary increases, what are some other effective benefits? Oh, I think I cut this off. What are some more effective benefits that we can offer?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it can be really challenging to get creative when you don't just have an unlimited budget, to be able to provide increases to all the time. The thing that
our customers, because we're like small to medium-sized businesses here.
Sure. I mean, one thing to think about too is what's important to every employee could differ. So I also always coach companies to make sure your managers, make sure they have an understanding of what is impactful to those employees, because you might have an employee that the work-life balance who maybe wants to be able to work from home one day a week or have an opportunity to have some of those other opportunities is just as important as getting an increase every single year, because that might be where they're at in their particular role or that particular stage of their life. So one of the things I would recommend is, even if you could do an employee assessment for your organization, what are some things that are super beneficial to employees outside of just pure salary increases that they're looking for in an organization? Some of the bigger trends we're seeing now are things like work-life balance. Do I have an opportunity to have a flex schedule in some ways? Do I have an opportunity to maybe work from home one day? And those can go a lot further than just even a salary increase. You could also do spot bonuses throughout the year. So that way you're not taking the budget hit as a full increase, but you could figure out which of those employees you really want to retain and give them a spot bonus or just an annual bonus that isn't necessarily going to be a continued increase year over year, but something that definitely shows your investment in them. Review your benefits package. Are there other perks that you can get for free in your benefits? Things like mental health opportunities that you could provide, even little things like, I know our company, everybody gets a free membership to wellness apps. So that way they have access to different things that might be very useful for them. So there are a lot of ways that you can get creative, and they might seem small, but they go a really long way with employees as well.
Yeah. I saw an article that said, especially Gen Z and working parents, I think like 60% said that they would rather have a flexible work schedule than a salary increase.
Absolutely.
And I think to me, it's more important than how much money I make, because I'm a mom.
And it's also not going to change. We're going to see a huge impact in the workforce in the next couple of years with Gen X and Gen Z coming out. And even what does the 4-day work week look like? Is that the norm? Are we going to go from 5 days to 4 days? Because that's something people are really pushing towards, because they feel they'd be more productive in 4 if they had that 3-day weekend, or having that work-life balance that's a big reason in some of the statistics that I showed that people are willing to leave. They are willing to leave a job without a backup because they want to find a company that can provide a little bit more of that flexibility. So we're seeing a big shift in what employees are going to demand. And I don't think that's going to stop from where we're at today as well.
No, it doesn't seem like it. Well, thank you so much. I know it's a little bit after 1 now. This was so helpful. There's so many comments in the Q&A box that's just saying thank you, and this was really helpful. Again, I'll send out a copy of the slides and the webinar recording tomorrow. And if you guys have any questions or need any further information, please feel free to email me or Katie. I'll put her information in there as well. And we really appreciate you joining us today, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was wonderful. And I'm happy to help in any other way that I can or answer any questions that might come through after today.
Okay, we appreciate it. Hope everyone has a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.